Your leftovers go bad in 3 days. Pirate food lasted 6 months. Same ingredient, same ocean air, same brutal heat. The difference? A brutal technique so counterintuitive that when I learned what they actually did to that meat before storing it, I almost didn't believe it worked. Hardtack was basically a rock you could eat. Flour, water, and nothing else. Bakers mixed it into a stiff dough, punched holes in it, then baked it until every last drop of moisture vanished. And I mean, every drop. Here's the thing about bacteria. They need water to survive. No moisture, no growth. No growth, no spoilage. It's that simple. So, how long could this stuff actually last? 50 years. I'm not exaggerating. Civil War soldiers in the 1860s ate hardtack that was baked during the Mexican-American War in the 1840s. Their grandfathers could have packed that same biscuit. Sailors had colorful names for it. Molar breakers, sheet iron, worm castles. That last one hits different when you learn why. See, after a few months at sea, weevils and maggots moved in. These little guys loved hardtack almost as much as the sailors needed it. The solution? Pirates would tap their biscuits on the table before eating, knock out the bugs, then chow down on what remained. Delicious? Absolutely not. But here's the trick that made it edible. You dunk it in coffee, rum, or whatever stew the cook threw together, give it a few minutes, and that granite slab softened into something your teeth could actually handle. One piece contained roughly 100 calories. Sailors received about a pound daily. That's your baseline, your foundation. Everything else was basically a topping. Now, a pound of flour biscuit sounds boring. And honestly, it was. But boring keeps you alive when you're 3 months from the nearest port with nothing but ocean in every direction. The hardtack handled your carbs. But protein? That required something far more aggressive. Something that turned raw meat into something almost mummified. Salt wasn't just a seasoning back then. It was basically magic. Here's what happens when you pack meat in salt. The salt pulls water right out of the flesh through osmosis. Remember that from high school biology? Water moves from areas of low salt concentration to high salt concentration. Your meat is low. The salt pile around it is high. Physics does the rest. Bacteria are picky little creatures. They need moisture to survive. Drop that moisture content below 25% and they can't reproduce, can't grow, can't spoil your food. Game over for the germs. Pirates used a simple ratio, 1 pound of salt for every 4 pounds of meat, pack it tight, seal the barrel, walk away. But here's what surprised me when I first learned this. A single 6-month voyage could burn through 2 tons of salt. 2 tons! That's roughly the weight of a small car, just for keeping food from rotting, and the stuff was expensive, like really expensive. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt instead of coins. That's where we get the word salary. When someone says you're not worth your salt, they're calling you worthless in ancient money terms. Now, salted meat wasn't exactly gourmet dining. You couldn't just slice it and eat. That beef needed soaking in fresh water for a full 24 hours before anyone cooked it. Skip that step? Congratulations, you're eating something saltier than the ocean you're sailing on. The real genius was the barrel system. Wooden casks kept everything sealed while the salt worked its preservation magic inside. Airtight wasn't the goal. Moisture-free was. So salt handled the science. But what actually happened to that meat after months in a barrel? The answer involves some truly disgusting nicknames. Salt horse. That's what pirates called their beef. Not because they loved it, because the stuff was so tough, so chewy, so absolutely punishing to eat that they figured it might actually be horse meat. I mean, could you even tell the difference after 2 years in a barrel? Probably not. Here's how the process worked. Fresh meat got slaughtered dockside, butchered into chunks, and immediately thrown into wooden casks. Layer of salt, layer of meat, more salt, more meat. Repeat until that barrel was packed tighter than your uncle's suitcase on vacation. The result? Meat that could last 5 years without spoiling. 5 years. That's longer than most celebrity marriages. The catch was texture, gray, rubbery, and tough enough to resole your boots with. But here's where things get genuinely weird. See, all that salt pulled liquid from the meat over time. This created a greasy, slimy substance floating at the top of each barrel. Sailors called it slush. The ship's cook would skim it off and sell it for making candles and soap. That side income, they called it a slush fund. Yes, that's where the term comes from. Every shady political expense account in history traces back to barrel grease on pirate ships. You're welcome for that dinner party fact. Each crew member got roughly 4 pounds of salted meat weekly. Standard ration, non-negotiable, and those copper cooking pots actually helped supplement diets. Trace amounts of copper leached into the food during hours of boiling, providing minerals that preserved vegetables couldn't. Pork followed the same process, but developed an even worse reputation. Sailors swore they could taste the original pig's bad attitude. Still, meat was only half the protein story. Dried fish lasted even longer and weighed almost nothing. Dried fish took preservation to another level entirely. Stockfish was cod that Vikings figured out how to turn into something almost supernatural. They hung whole fish on wooden racks along the Norwegian coast, letting freezing wind do all the work. No salt needed, just cold air and patience. 3 months later, that fish lost 80% of its water weight. What remained was basically protein jerky, hard as your grandfather's old leather belt and about as appetizing looking. But here's the thing. 1 pound of stockfish packed the same nutritional punch as 5 pounds of fresh fish. 5 pounds. That's efficiency your accountant would cry over. The texture, though, absolute nightmare. You couldn't just bite into stockfish. Sailors had to beat it with mallets first, literally tenderizing it like a grudge match, then soak it overnight. Only then could you actually chew the stuff without losing teeth. Worth the hassle? Absolutely. This dried fish could last 12 years without spoiling. 12. That's longer than most car payments. Longer than my first 3 relationships combined. Caribbean pirates specifically wanted stockfish from Newfoundland. Those cold Canadian waters produced the best quality cod, and merchants traded it throughout the entire Atlantic. Newfoundland to the Caribbean to Europe and back. A triangle of dried fish commerce that made everyone money. And the smell? Let's just say you could identify a stockfish cargo ship from downwind. Sailors developed very specific tolerance levels. The Vikings invented this around 800 AD. Over 1,000 years later, pirates were still using the exact same technique. If something works that well, why change it? But preservation wasn't just about food. The biggest challenge on any ship was something far more basic: drinking water. And the solution was surprisingly alcoholic. Fresh water was actually the most dangerous thing on a pirate ship. Sounds backwards, right? But here's what happened. Water stored in wooden barrels turned into a science experiment within weeks. Green slime coated the inside. Algae bloomed like underwater gardens. Bacteria threw parties you definitely weren't invited to. Sailors who drank stagnant water got dysentery, typhoid, and about 6 other diseases I can't pronounce. The very thing keeping them alive was slowly killing them. Enter rum. Alcohol above 40% kills most waterborne pathogens dead. Not weakens them, kills them. Pirates figured this out centuries before anyone understood germ theory. They didn't know why rum was safer. They just knew their buddies who drank water got sick. Their buddies who drank rum? Mostly fine. Well, drunk. But fine. British Admiral Edward Vernon changed the game in 1740. He noticed his sailors were constantly hammered. Shocking, I know. So he invented grog by mixing rum with water. Clever move. The alcohol still killed enough bacteria to make water drinkable, but sailors could actually function afterward. Each pirate received half a pint of rum daily. That's roughly 400 calories. Not nothing when you're hauling ropes and fighting naval battles, but rum did more than hydrate. It worked as a mild anesthetic when the ship's surgeon needed to dig out a musket ball. It cleaned wounds when bandages ran out. It boosted morale when land was 6 weeks away and you'd eaten weevil-infested hardtack for breakfast. The barrels were stored deep in the hold where temperatures stayed cool and consistent. Smart placement for valuable cargo. And speaking of fighting sickness at sea, some pirates discovered that the real lifesaver wasn't alcohol at all. It was fermented cabbage, sauerkraut, fermented cabbage, the food that smells like gym socks left in a locker for 3 weeks. And it saved more lives than any medicine pirates had access to. Here's the problem: nobody understood back then. Sailors were dying from something invisible. Their gums bled. Teeth fell out. Old wounds reopened for no reason. They called it scurvy, and it killed more sailors than combat, storms, and shipwrecks combined. The cure? Vitamin C. But nobody knew vitamins existed yet. What they did know was this. Crews that ate sauerkraut didn't die. Crews that didn't? Graveyards. Captain James Cook figured this out in 1768. He loaded his ship with barrels of fermented cabbage and made his men eat it daily. 3 years at sea. 0 deaths from scurvy. That's not luck. That's cabbage. The fermentation process was the secret weapon. When you pack shredded cabbage in salt, bacteria start breaking it down. Sounds gross, I know, but those bacteria actually create vitamin C during fermentation. Fresh cabbage has some, sauerkraut has more, and it lasts 18 months in a sealed barrel. German and Dutch pirates brought this tradition aboard their vessels. Smart move. While English crews were losing teeth and dying mysteriously, these guys were crunching fermented vegetables and staying healthy. Pickled onions and cucumbers worked too. Anything submerged in vinegar or brine created an acidic environment where harmful bacteria couldn't survive. The same acid that made your face scrunch up was killing pathogens. My grandmother made sauerkraut every fall. Whole house smelled like a crime scene, but that stuff lasted forever. Pirates understood the same principle 300 years earlier. Now fermented vegetables kept you healthy, but you know what kept you actually full? Cheese coated in wax. Cheese on a ship in the tropics. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? Wrong. The Dutch figured out something brilliant. Coat a wheel of cheese in thick wax, and suddenly you've got dairy that laughs at tropical heat. Here's how it worked. Hard cheeses like Edam and Gouda were aged until most of their moisture evaporated. Less water means less opportunity for bacteria. Then cheesemakers dipped the entire wheel in melted wax, sealing it completely from air, insects, and humidity. The result? Cheese that lasted over a year at sea. But the Dutch went further. They designed Edam wheels perfectly round for a reason most people never consider. Round cheese rolls. It doesn't bruise when the ship pitches and heaves. Square cheese, corners crack, edges chip. Mold gets in. Round cheese just tumbles around the cargo hold like a happy little bowling ball. I've seen plenty of cheese in my day. My uncle ran a small dairy operation. That stuff went bad in weeks without refrigeration. Pirates were eating cheese older than some crew members. Blows my mind. And the nutritional value was clutch. When salted meat rations ran low, cheese provided fat and protein that kept men working. One decent-sized wheel could supplement a crew's diet for weeks. Here's the thing nobody mentions. Pirates specifically targeted merchant ships carrying cheese. Not gold, not silk. Cheese wheels were listed in cargo manifests as valuable goods. Raiders knew exactly what they were looking for. The outer rind that formed during aging created another natural barrier. Double protection. Wax outside, hardened rind underneath. Now, cheese kept pirates fed. But you know what really stretched those provisions further? Dried peas that tripled in size when you added water. Dried peas are basically magic beans, minus the giant. 1 cup of these shriveled little things, drop them in boiling water and watch them triple in size. That's 3 cups of food from 1 cup of storage space. On a cramped ship where every inch mattered, this was genius-level efficiency. But here's what most people get wrong. Legumes weren't just filler. They were survival fuel. Dried peas, beans, and oats all share one trick. Get their moisture content below 14%, and bacteria simply cannot grow. No special treatment needed, no wax, no salt. Just dry them properly, and they'll outlast your grandmother's fruitcake. The ship's cook had one signature dish, peas porridge. Sounds fancy until you realize it was just dried peas boiled for hours until they turned into thick mush. Gray, bland, mushy. Absolutely delicious when you haven't seen land in 2 months. My grandmother made something similar during lean winters. She called it poor man's stew. Pirates called it dinner. And the weird part is, these boring staples actually kept crews healthier. All that fiber, it helped digestion when every other food on board was either salted, dried, or swimming in rum. Your gut needs something to work with. Oats were stuffed into canvas bags and tucked away from any hint of moisture. Stored right, they lasted 3 years easy. Beans got soaked overnight in seawater to save the precious fresh water supply, then boiled clean before eating. Here's a number that surprised me. A well-stocked pirate ship carried roughly 400 pounds of dried legumes. That's enough carbohydrates to keep a crew swinging cutlasses for months. Now, dry goods stayed put. But you know what food walked itself right to the dinner table? Live animals, walking right there on deck. Forget preservation methods. The freshest meat on any pirate ship literally clucked, oinked, and bleated its way across the Atlantic. Ships carried chickens, pigs, goats, and sometimes even cattle in rickety wooden pens. These animals were basically self-preserving protein. No salt needed, no drying. Just keep them alive until you're hungry enough to eat them. Goats were the MVPs. They ate garbage. Literal garbage, rope scraps, vegetable peels, moldy bread crusts. Feed them whatever, and they'd convert it into milk and eventually meat. Plus, they took up less space than cattle. My uncle kept goats on his farm, and those things would eat a leather boot if you let them. Same energy on a pirate ship. Chickens pulled double duty. Fresh eggs for weeks, then fresh dinner when the eggs stopped coming. Smart, right? But here's where it gets weird. Turtles. Caribbean pirates went absolutely crazy for sea turtles. They'd catch these massive creatures, flip them onto their backs, and the turtles would stay alive for months. No food, no water, just sitting there, waiting to become soup. One single sea turtle could provide 100 pounds of fresh meat. That's enough to feed a whole crew for days. The captain ate best, naturally. His cabin often housed the prime animals. Better chickens, healthier goats. Common sailors got whatever stumbled around longest. And the noise? Absolute chaos. Roosters crowing at dawn, pigs squealing during storms, goats headbutting everything. A pirate ship sounded like a floating barnyard. Fresh meat was a luxury that disappeared fast. Once those animals were gone, crews returned to barrels of salted beef and hardtack. Speaking of barrels, those wooden containers weren't just storage. They were survival science. Barrels weren't just containers. They were engineering marvels that most people completely overlook. Coopers spent years learning their craft. One bad seal, one warped stave, and an entire barrel of salted pork turns into rotten sludge. These guys were the unsung heroes of every voyage. My grandfather was a woodworker, and he always said the hardest joint to make was one that had to hold liquid. Now imagine making that joint survive 6 months of ocean waves. Here's what's clever. Ships stored barrels in the lowest part of the hull, right against the outer planking. Why? Seawater on the other side kept temperatures around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's basically a natural refrigerator. No ice, no technology, just smart placement. But organization mattered even more. Crews loaded provisions in reverse order. Food they'd eat last went in first, buried at the bottom. Food for the first weeks sat on top. Mess this up and you're eating dried peas while fresh cheese rots underneath. And the weird part is how much barrels moved around. Sailors rotated them weekly. The side facing the hull got warmer from sun hitting the ship's exterior. Switch positions, and everything stays evenly cool. Tedious work, absolutely necessary. Wet and dry provisions never touched. Salted meat in one section, hardtack in another. Moisture transfer could ruin months of careful preservation overnight. A well-organized ship carried enough food for 100 men to survive 6 months without touching land. That's 18,000 meals planned down to the barrel position. Pretty impressive for guys without spreadsheets. All these preservation methods work together like a system. Salt, drying, pickling, live animals, proper storage. Remove one piece and the whole thing falls apart. Pirates didn't just raid ships, they mastered food science.